Welcome to the Weekly Report. It's February 28th and I'm Robert Barwick. In today's news, Julia Gillard has been ordered to fall on her carbon tax sword. And secondly, Irish eyes are smiling, central bankers are crying after Ireland's elections. But first, Julia Gillard has been ordered to fall on her carbon tax sword. What happened last week when Julia Gillard announced her carbon tax is nowhere near a triumph for her politically. It's political suicide. She's signed her death warrant. That may be why when she made her announcement in her typically bland voice, I couldn't help but thinking it was like listening to someone recite the Nicene Creed. When Gillard was in question time in Parliament on February 24th, she said, to justify her tax, she said,
"Climate change is real. I believe that. I believe that it's caused by human activity. We need to act on climate change and build a low pollution economy for the future. We need to do that."
For those of you who have been good churchgoers all your life, you see similarities with the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God. We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. The only comparison I'm making is to the sort of a dirge-like quality that you often hear these things recited in. That's what Gillard was doing in Parliament in question time. When she announced this tax that's going to kill off what's left of Australia's industry, and that is its intention. Now, it's political suicide. Does she know that? Well, there's a chance she does. But unfortunately for Australia, for the last 30 years, this is the way politics in this country has been run. A governing party will follow the dictates of the City of London to put up a policy, such as a carbon tax. In the 80s, it was things like free trade. Put up a policy that is so destructive to the Australian economy, the people turn on that government en masse and toss them out at the next election usually. However, the opposition is always there to keep that policy going. And this is what Gillard, before Christmas, when she was having a go at Tony Abbott over the aisle, described as the consensus of Australian politics since 1983. Both sides know who they're serving, the City of London, and they've rammed these things through. So she knows, and certainly the people who put up to her know, that she will be thrown out on her ear for doing this. The damage is going to be so great. However, once it's in, it's in. And will Tony Abbott repeal it? Well, remember with Tony Abbott, he was a member of the Howard government who had their own proposal for an emissions trading scheme. They don't have a moral position on this. They don't have an ethical position on this. Their position is one only of just taking advantage or being blown the way the Australian people blow them, short term, right? So this is a particularly damaging thing Julia Gillard's done. Yes, it's going to destroy her politically, but it's going to destroy the Australian economy more fundamentally. There's a real parallel between this policy and what the Labor government in the early 90s did with tariff cuts. Now, over the weekend, people from BlueScope Steel, what's left, the main owners of what's left of Australia's steel industry, made the point that this is economic vandalism. It will annihilate manufacturing, because their argument is if we have a carbon tax on activity like manufacturing in Australia, however, imports coming into the country are not carbon taxed, those imports will be cheaper and drive our manufacturing out of business. And of course, that is true. But that's exactly what the situation was in the early 90s when under Ross Garnaut, the same character who came up with this idea, under Ross Garnaut, the Hawke-Keating government slashed tariffs on manufacturing then. And people were screaming about, hang on, there's no level playing field. We're cutting tariffs, but our competitors are not cutting their tariffs. And I reported here a few weeks ago what Craig Emerson, the member of the current Trade Minister, said about that. He boasted that at the time, the government didn't care that there was no level playing field. They didn't care that it would easily have such an unfairly destructive impact on our economy, because he said it was the right thing to do in terms of competition. Well, the same mentality is being applied to this issue of a carbon tax. They've been conned or bribed into thinking it's the right thing to do for global warming, and they're not being incompetent in terms of, or being negligent about the impact it is on industry. They believe that impact is the right thing to do. And what's the end game here? The bottom line for all this is the things that Australians need to sustain our living standards, to sustain our very lives: energy, industry, transportation. Those are the things that are being targeted for annihilation by this policy. Why? Because the source of this policy is the British Crown, City of London cooked up hopes of global warming pushed by outfits such as Prince Philip's, World Wildlife Fund and the whole works, as part of their policy of genocide to depopulate the world and depopulate Australia. And this surely will do that. Anyone who knows anything about how our industry works know that this will have a genocidal impact on the Australian population. Poorer people will not be able to afford energy to heat their homes in winter and cool their homes in summer. That alone is going to cause a total skyrocketing of deaths in areas of diseases of poverty, lung diseases and all those things associated with getting the flu, heat wave, heat strokes, etc. that happen in the summertime, which we've already had experience in Australia. And that's just the beginning of it. It will bankrupt our economy if we don't have energy to produce our needs. And what's the flow-on effect of that going to be? So it's the same intention as what's behind the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, etc. This is what's driving this. And so with an intention that's that big, it's much more important than the political life of any one political party. So in probably 3 years' time, when the next election rolls around, Gillard will be thrown out in the rear, the Greens will be thrown out on their rear, but this policy will be in place. Here's the thing, it's up to the Australian people to recognise they're the ones being targeted for genocide. What are they going to do about it? The good news about this particular policy though, unlike 20 years ago with the tariff cuts, this is a desperation sort of end game being pushed by the British Empire right around the world through this global warming hoax. But it's being pushed at a time of global economic collapse, which has triggered a global mass strike backlash right around the world, which you're seeing it. That is the hope for the world. That's the hope for Australia, the people rising up to do an Egypt, if you will. And if Australians do that, then we can stop this thing. If Australians just vote for the opposition, again, because the opposition tells them what they want to hear, rather than on principle, then we're doomed. That's the issue. All right, moving on. The good news is, if you want to see an example of how this mass strike actually does work, look at what's happened in Ireland as of the weekend. Like I said, Irish eyes are smiling, central bankers are crying. All Australians should be heartened by the Irish election results because it's an example of the fate that awaits Gillard and everybody else that continues to pursue the City of London line. The governing parties of Ireland, Fianna Fáil and the Greens, were totally routed by the voters because they were the ones who did the deal on the bailout. The City of London dictated bailout, which bankrupted the Irish people to bail out British banks. And this routing was monumental. So you got a new Prime Minister from the Fine Gael party. Labor doubled its representation. Sinn Féin tripled its representation in the Parliament. I'll talk about Sinn Féin in a second, just to make a funny anecdote. There were a lot of signs apparently on people's doors in Ireland, funny kind of signs telling political door knockers, or what they call canvassers, to go away. And the signs said things like, all canvassers will be shot. Canvassers for Fianna Fáil will be shot twice. Canvassers for the Greens will have their bicycle tyres locked up. Now, on to Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin's success is emblematic of this mass strike period that we're in. Now, LaRouche said something pretty profound yesterday. He called this mass strike a global revolution against an evil empire. And he's putting it in the context of what you're seeing in the Middle East, spreading right across there, etc. All of which is driven, forget all the semantics, forget all the politics that people, or the way the media interprets it. It's all driven by the people responding to the fact that the state of the economy that services their needs is being destroyed in areas like food production, etc., right? And it's the system of globalisation that's done that. And that's why LaRouche is calling it a global revolution against an evil empire. Sinn Féin is a party that's 130 or so years old in Ireland. It's a party that's dedicated to principle. It's dedicated to national sovereignty, and it's dedicated to an economic system that fosters the common good of the people, which is what preserves your national sovereignty. That's what Sinn Féin is dedicated to. Nevertheless, for a long time, that party has languished at levels of supporter of about, often down to 1% of the population. You know, so you hear about Gerry Adams and these type of Sinn Féin people, their actual support in the Irish political system is often really, really, really low, because they do stick to their principles, and of course, you know, the media like to play up the parties that are just much more opportunistic than that. However, in this crisis, who are the people turning to for leadership? Sinn Féin. And so like I said, their representation has tripled, and they got, you know, close to 15% of the vote in this election. The people are not just turning to them. Sinn Féin's principal position is shaping that of the other parties as well. So the new Prime Minister, the increased majority of the Labor Party, they know, they have in the back of their mind, because of the support that's been given to Sinn Féin, that they better not turn around and compromise with the City of London just because the people have had their say now and there won't be a vote for a while, right? The bottom line for all this is the central banks are in an absolute panic. Since September 2008, when Lehman Brothers went under and this whole system began to unravel, it started before that, of course, it started about August 2007, but the big blow-up was September 2008, and that's when the bailouts started to happen. Central banks ordered governments around the world to swing into action and start bailing out. Since that, they've built up a whole, if you like, superstructure of bailout that's coming out of people's pockets. And everywhere there's a new hotspot, the people have to be looted for another bailout. Ireland is the first place to challenge that. Now, that challenge was overridden by the City of London by what they did to the Fianna Fáil party and got them to compromise last year. Well, now that compromise has been totally scrapped. And the central bankers know what's at stake. If this unravels in Ireland, the whole thing unravels, the whole kit and caboodle, the whole inter-alpha banking system, which is the British Empire. So we now are in a new reality when it comes to the global economy. Monitor these events closely. We'll keep you updated. So thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week for more reports.